I'm a dog, but it takes one to know one. Alright. And I can go for hours, ain't believe me, had to show one. Alright.
Hello, fellow students of New Albany High School. Katie Davis here. With the end of school fast approaching, I know we're all thinking about finals, new sports tryouts, summer plans, and of course the ACT. April 9th is the last date to test before school lets out for the summer. Because the ACT is so important in creating opportunities for us students, like getting into the college of our choice, getting scholarships, or chasing our dreams, I'm here to give you a few tips on this test. The ACT is a test just like any other that you can study for. So I'm going to start with the English section. I am going to do this kind of Coach Garrett style today. So let's go to the ACT website. And I love this website because there are tons of sample test questions, there's options for test prep, and like I said, the ACT is just like any test, so it's very important if you want to do well to study for it. So let's go right into my tips for the English section. So tip number 1, choose the most concise answer. The ACT English questions are looking for answers that will result in the most straightforward, logical, and concise sentence structure. You should try and find the choice that provides all the necessary information for the sentence to make grammatical sense, but nothing extra. The best writing says what it needs to say, clearly and concisely. So in question 3 right here, D is the most concise and correct answer. It doesn't say anything that it doesn't need to, but it gets all the needed information in. So another good idea, or my tip 2, is to read the paragraph first. So you need to have a good idea of what the questions are talking about and what context the grammar is being taken into. So I would advise to read the sentence with question 1 before answering question 1. And tip 3, and my final tip for the English section, is to be careful with no change answers. On questions for the ACT English that will ask you to choose the answer that makes the sentence grammatically correct, you will always, well not always, but most of the time have an option to choose no change. This can be a dangerous option because if you aren't aware of more obscure grammar rules, you might choose it by accident on some questions. But on the upside, no change is used about 25% of the time, or 1/4. So if you realize that you're using it more than 25% of the time, then it's a warning sign to go back and check your answers. Next, we're going to talk about the ACT math section. My first tip for this section is to pay attention to diagrams. The ACT Math will often provide you with diagrams like this one that describe the problem we're trying to answer. It's important to pay attention to these figures because they will give you clues about which answer choices are the most logical. If a problem is asking you to figure out an angle and some of the choices are acute while others are obtuse, you'll be able to illuminate at least a couple of answers just by looking at the diagram. If it doesn't seem like an answer is possible based on the visual aid you're given, it's usually safe to cross it out. My second tip for the math section is to plug in your answer. Let's see here. Like in this problem. A really important strategy that will help you be sure that you have the correct answer on math problems is to plug in each one of the answer choices if there's a variable in the problem. If any question asks you to solve for x, plug the answer choices back into the original equation to see which one works. You don't even need to really solve it. This can be more time consuming than just solving the equation if you already know how to do that. So only use it as a last resort if you're stumped. Moving on to the reading section. My first tip for this is to start with your strengths. The ACT reading section is always structured the same way, with 4 topic areas in the same order that each correspond to a passage or a pair of passages. The topics are as follows: prose or literary narrative, social science, humanities, and natural science. To make sure you're getting the most out of this section, you should start with reading the passages that correspond to the topic area which you're most comfortable. This might just mean starting with the subject matter that is most interesting to you, and will make for a quicker read. You'll get the questions that are easiest for you out of the way first, and won't risk running out of time before you have the chances to answer them. For example, this one's a literary narrative, so you would pick to read it first if you like stories. My second tip is to skim the passages. There's a lot of time on the ACT reading section, and the best way to deal with it is to read the passages as efficiently as possible. For some students, it might be manageable to read passages closely and still have enough time to finish the section. But you have to be a very quick and thorough reader. The best strategy for most people is to skim the passages instead. In order to skim effectively, you should read the intro and conclusion paragraphs and the first and last sentences of every body paragraph in the passage. This will give you a good overview of the main ideas and allow you to answer most big picture questions about the passage. When you get to questions about details, like this one, you can always read specific parts of the passage over and over again, depending on what they ask. Have the science section. My first tip for this last section is to rely on visuals, a lot like in the math. The ACT science section hits you with a lot of complicated terminology and unfamiliar facts that it might seem overwhelming. The best policy when faced with all this information is to ignore it and actually go straight for the graphs, which will provide enough information for you to answer the majority of the questions that you're faced with. Much of the information that you're given on this exam is just extra stuff thrown in to make sure that the section seems more difficult than it actually is. The ACT science is more about logical reasoning and data interpretation than actually knowing any science. So if you can read the graphs, you should be fine. A more specific tip is to do the section about conflicting viewpoints last. The conflicting viewpoint section on the ACT science is usually the most time-consuming for each student. In case you're not familiar with it, this part of the ACT science sections asks you to read 2 or 3 passages that detail different viewpoints on a scientific issue. You will then be asked to answer questions about these viewpoints and how they relate to one another. Since this is more reading intensive and can eat up a lot of time, it is best to save it for last so you don't end up missing other questions later in the section that would be quicker and easier for you to answer. That is taking the ACT writing test because the college you're applying to requires it, or maybe you just want to test your skills. I have tips for you too. First, since the ACT essay prompts are relatively predictable, you can do some of your essay planning before the test to save yourself time and stress. You should choose concrete examples from art, history, and literature, or personal experience, and try not to use hypothetical or vague examples to support your points. Keep in mind that all the facts that you use in your essay don't actually have to be true. Graders don't have time to fact check, so they take everything you write at face value. This means you can make up statistics or historical facts to support your thesis, and you won't be penalized. Second tip, write a great intro and conclusion. It's likely that the essay graders will read your intro and conclusion more closely than the rest of your essay. If they can find your thesis easily, you're already on the right track. If you can demonstrate basic knowledge of how to logically structure an essay and stay on topic, you should be good to go. Not least, I have a few tips for the morning of the ACT. First of all, wake up early. Science has proven that it actually helps you get better grades on any test that you take. Even better, exercise. It gets your blood pumping and your mind more alert. Third, make an awesome breakfast, something delicious and nutritious. Fourth, read something, anything. It helps you wake up your brain and get you ready for all the reading you're about to do. Fifth, pack water and a snack for the breaks. You don't want to be stranded, hungry, or thirsty, which can be very distracting. Before you walk out the door, make sure you haven't forgotten your calculator, your ID, or your ticket. After the test, make sure that you plan something fun that you can look forward to. For example, lunch or ACs with your friends, biking on the Tanglefoot, or a trip to Tupelo.
That's all the tips I have for you guys. Remember, the last day to sign up for the April ACT is March 4th in 2 days. Goodbye and good luck.